In this, the fourth and the last interview of our series of programs, I'll be talking to a man who needs little or no introduction, one of the most successful agents ever run by MI6. I'm, of course, referring to Oleg Gordievsky. Oleg, your career as a British agent within the senior ranks of the KGB must have been continually fraught with hazards, and at the outset at least, surely some doubts. Could you tell me something of your hopes and fears at this time?
I started to work for the British intelligence service in the autumn 1974. And it continued for another about 11 years until my downfall in May 1985. And in the first couple of months, I was still full of doubts and inhibitions and hesitation about how to work for an intelligence service which the KGB regarded as hostile. Would I let down my colleagues if I would collaborate with another intelligence service? But those doubts disappeared very soon, because the British service is very humane and really very good, competent and professional. They explained to me that our cooperation would never damage anybody, other officers, particularly my friends, and particularly good people in the KGB, which was my main concern. And secondly, I realized that if I wanted to help the West, and it was what I did, I wanted to help the West to protect its security and sovereignty against the communist expansion, then I should tell the British friends everything, just everything. And so eventually, after a couple of weeks, not even months, I started to share all the KGB secrets with the British intelligence service. And in the nearly 11 years of our cooperation, I managed to produce more than 10,000 reports on different subjects, particularly on intelligence, but also political subjects and other and operational aspects of the KGB's activities against the West and against Britain in particular. Apart from it, 1 or 2 years after the start of my cooperation with the KGB, I and the Brits, we found ways how to spirit out of the premises of the KGB station in Copenhagen and later in London, authentic KGB documents. Copies of them would be made immediately, and then I would take those documents back again, putting them back into the safes of the KGB station there, Copenhagen or London. It was a very dangerous operation. Each time the risk was high, but the fact was and is that we are in possession of several hundred of authentic KGB documents, which confirmed all my information, all the intelligence which I was able to pass on to the British orally.
This information, Oleg, must have been of immense value, not only to the British, but the West in general. Were there any specific instances when it played a crucial role in counterintelligence operations?
There was a number of cases where my information played a crucial role for Britain or allied services or countries. There was mostly operational information, but sometimes even political or military political information. For example, with the help of my information, a senior official of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway, Arne Treholt, was arrested. An officer of the British Security Service, MI5, Michael Bettany, was arrested. A senior officer of the Military Security Service in Sweden, Bergling, was arrested. And there was a number of such cases, like, for example, a couple of important officials in some other countries, which I am not in the position to name just now. If you mention the political aspects, Then I would take the example of the Operation Ryan, which is the policy, or rather the requirement by the KGB and the GRU, the Military Intelligence Service, the requirement to watch and to monitor signs of the preparation by the West to a sudden nuclear attack on the Soviet Union outside context of a conflict. There was no preparation to a sudden nuclear attack on the Soviet Union by the United States or by the NATO, not at all. And yet, the Soviet leadership, the civilian party leadership, and the military leadership, under the defense minister, Marshal Ustinov, they, in their paranoia and self-indoctrinated, as a result of self-indoctrination by their own propaganda about so-called aggressive NATO, aggressive West, they started to believe that the United States could do such a thing, carry a sudden preventive nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. One of the reasons was that under President Reagan, the American administration had become very ideological. President Reagan, his Secretary of State Schultz, and other important officials of the American administration would hold very forceful, ideological speeches or talks or make statements, anti-communist, anti-Soviet. They were very correct, really, by what's said actually in those statements. It was all correct. But it was new because if in the past British governments, American administrations used not to be ideological, now under Reagan, it had a clear Western, as they would say in the Soviet Union, bourgeois ideological trend. And the Soviet Union, the Soviet leadership, was an ideological leadership. They were able to invade Czechoslovakia driven by ideological considerations. The same they did towards Afghanistan. Getting involved in Afghanistan as a result of ideological position toward the party in power in Afghanistan. And they believed that when the Soviet Union was able to start really a conflict or an invasion or an attack driven by ideology, now the American administration could do it. And profoundly frightened by those speeches, the Soviet leadership started to speak about the threat of a sudden nuclear attack. And the KGB and the GRU were asked to monitor signs allegedly increasing, accelerating signs of Western preparation to a sudden nuclear attack. And the West, the British government, the British intelligence service, didn't know anything about it. I was the first who was able to tell them about it, to explain it all to them. And a few months later, I was able to produce a number of KGB documents. KGB documents of the center, headquarters, requirements sent by the center about how to monitor those signs, and a number of our own KGB station letters and dispatches sent back to Moscow, how the KGB station in London was planning to watch, to monitor those signs.
Oleg, in your book, KGB, The Inside Story, you commented on the fact that you took a great interest in the history of the British intelligence service and on KGB efforts to penetrate it. What is your own overview of KGB successes against British intelligence since 1945?
The penetration of the British intelligence service and the British security service took place, first of all, in the late 30s and during the war. After the war, it was not so tremendous because Kim Philby, other members of the Cambridge Five, they were approaching their end, the end of their time as KGB Soviet agents. Then there was another tremendous success of the KGB, the recruitment of George Blake. George Blake was very, very important for the KGB. He damaged the British intelligence community tremendously, not only the British, but also the American, because he compromised joint British-American operations in Germany, in Berlin. So it was probably the last significant success of the KGB. Now in Moscow, they make signals about other sources, allegedly, in the British intelligence community at that time, 40s, 50s, maybe even in the 60s. I don't know anything about it. I haven't heard anything about a major unknown source of the KGB in somewhere in the intelligence service or the security service. But I don't rule out entirely that they might have had some agents on the periphery of the British intelligence community in the 60s. Because remembering the KGB files, I had the possibility to go through in 81, beginning of 82, before my assignment to Britain. I remember that the KGB had heard something about the discussions in the Home Office, in the Security Service, and between them and the Foreign Office about too many spies under the cover of the embassy and the trade delegation in Highgate, that maybe some very sharp measures ought to be taken. There was somebody reporting about some echo, really, of the real events in the intelligence community. But I still think that the George Blake was the last significant success of the KGB in penetrating the intelligence community and generally the British government, since there was nothing. And one important thing, the British intelligence service started to show interest for me in the second half of the 60s. And then there was first contact between me and them in 1973, and then a proper dialogue in 74. And yet there was no KGB knowledge about it, which means one thing, that there was no KGB penetration of the SIS at all between the 60s and now.
One of the things you were able to do when you arrived in Britain was to settle the question, first of all, of the fifth man, and of the alleged treason of Sir Roger Hollis. Could you tell me something about this?
In the British media, in the spy books, with the general public, there was a feeling that they didn't know who was the fifth man. I was the first man to reveal to the British intelligence community who was the fifth man. I told them about him, John Cairncross, when I started to speak to the British, and it was in 1974-75. They were not particularly surprised about it. Somehow either they knew it already or had a very good guess about it. John Cairncross, the fifth man. When Christopher Andrew, the historian from Cambridge, and I published our book, KGB The Inside Story, 3 years ago, there, for the first time, we made it public who was the fifth man, John Cairncross. And since there are other people who claim that they were the first to reveal the name of the fifth man, but it was actually Christopher Andrew and Oleg Gordievsky who did it in 3 years ago. As to Roger Hollis, I was able again to confirm to the SIS in 74-75 that there was no evidence whatsoever about him somehow in touch with the Russians. And when I went public in 1991, again I started to speak about him as an entirely innocent man who had never been any Soviet KGB agent at all. It's total nonsense to imagine it. I remember once in about 89, there was another explosion of publicity about alleged contact or involvement of Roger Hollis with the KGB. There was a KGB telegram from the KGB station in London sent to Moscow, and the telegram was lying on the desk of one of the officers responsible for Britain. And reading it and seeing the telegram on his desk, I asked him, Igor, it was Igor Titov, Igor, tell me please, what it is all about? What are they writing about? Why do they claim that Roger Hollis allegedly used to be a KGB agent? Why? And do you know what he said? He said, no idea. I'm mystified. I'm mystified. It must be a very sophisticated British ploy.
Oleg, I want to come back to something you touched on earlier. The efforts of the British government in the early 1970s to curtail KGB activity in London. How successful were these efforts?
In 1971, the British government, the Foreign Office, the Home Office, took the decision to expel the bulk of Soviet spies in Great Britain. And using the defection of a KGB officer, Oleg Lenin, as a pretext, they expelled 105 Soviet intelligence officers, KGB and military intelligence officers of the GRU. It was a tremendous event in the life both of the British government and the intelligence community and of that of the KGB, because the work of the KGB and the GRU as well since had never become the same. Practically, the network and the activities of the two intelligence services in London were destroyed. They never recovered since. We all know about the extremely damaging effect of the Soviet espionage work against Britain. The Cambridge Five, George Blake, and numerous other spies recruited by them, who passed on damaging for the British interests information to the KGB, who corrupted the British society. And the expulsion of 1971 put an end to it. Instead of 70 about KGB officers, only 5-6 remained in 71, and in the middle of the 80s, in my time, when I was, as a British agent, I was head of the KGB station in London, the KGB had only 22 officers. The GRU, instead of something like 50-55 in 71, the GRU had in 85 only 14 officers. Maybe when you can compare those figures with the figures of British intelligence personnel abroad, they seem high for you, but they're not high. For the KGB station in a major Western country like Britain, 22 officers, it's very little. For the GRU, only 14 officers in an important NATO country like Great Britain, those are very few. So and they remain demoralized, nervous, undecisive, usually first posting officers, because it was very difficult to get a visa to Britain since after 71, because Britain started a policy of not granting visas to identified intelligence officers. So first posting officers were posted in Great Britain, and they were inexperienced, undecisive, practically very weak. That's why the intelligence, or rather espionage damage to Britain after 1971 was entirely insignificant.
Oleg, your KGB career ended rather abruptly, of course, with your arrest in 1985. But after your escape, you were able to furnish the British and the Americans, I believe, with a great deal of additional information and insight into Soviet intentions. Could you elaborate further on this?
after my downfall and then after my escape from the territory of Soviet Union in July 1985. And 85 was a very important year because Gorbachev had come to power that year. Immediately after my escape, very intensive debriefings started to take place. From the last days of July until the end of the year. And a number of very important papers had been made and sent to the British government and also to the American government. An important fact was that while I was working for the British, clandestinely, still being a Soviet official, only a tiny part of my information from me, could have been sent to the United States because my security was of great importance. And the British service was very concerned about how not to spread too much intelligence which was received from me. After my escape, immediately everything which had been collected from me before my escape, and even more as a result of the intensive debriefings between July and the autumn 85, it was all sent to Washington. Also, Bill Casey, head of the CIA and member of the American cabinet, friend of President Reagan, he came personally to debrief me in the middle of September in order to brief his friend, preparing him for his first meeting with Gorbachev. And it turned out that it was very, very, very useful for them.
Oleg, I'd like to turn now to Soviet perceptions of British intelligence. In the KGB, what is the general view of the service, its particular areas of expertise, its strengths, its weaknesses, its overall operational effectiveness?
If we speak about the weaknesses or the strengths of the SAS in the eyes of the KGB, then I should tell you that the opinion of the SIS and the KGB used to be very high all the time, despite the heavy penetration of the KGB, by the KGB of the service in the 40s and the 50s. The fact was that those traitors like Kim Philby or George Blake, on one hand, they told the KGB everything about the service, revealed and compromised a lot of names and a lot of operations, it's true, making the service weaker. On the other hand, they had to tell the KGB about the strength of the service, about their strong sides and strong points, very good aspects of their tradecraft and about the quality of their people. And eventually, as a result, the KGB developed a tremendous respect for the British service. And what is the most important strength of the British service, according to the opinion of the KGB? It is the human relations factor, the tremendous instinct of each British officer how to build, to develop, to deepen relations to the counterpart, to the, say, target of cultivation. Or having recruited the target as an agent, how to continue running the agent, how to broaden the possibilities of the agent, and so on. The British service in this respect is the best in the world. And the ability, such a good quality of the British officers, on one hand, it is result of an excellent, old and profound tradition of the British service. The other is simply reflection of the general quality of British people, with your schools, with your cultural tradition, with your history, with your churches, with all the British civilization and culture. Britain was able to produce a very special type of people who relate very well to other persons, people who speak a very courteous and very nice language, people who understand the heart and the soul of another person, people who have sympathy, compassion, interest in the life of other people, genuine one, not just a pretense. And that tremendous quality of British people is reflected in the quality of intelligence officers. As a result, tremendous successes in the operational work.
Finally, Oleg, as we face the new challenges of the post-Cold War world, do you think that the British intelligence and security services are adequately equipped for the tasks that lie ahead?
You're asking me about whether the British intelligence service will be well equipped for the challenges of the future. The answer is, of course, yes, provided it's helped by the British society, because the tasks are numerous, and the tasks for the British intelligence service are difficult. There are numerous new states. We are witnessing proliferation of nuclear weapons, illegal weapon smuggling, drugs, crime of all kinds coming, and brutality coming to us from Yugoslavia and the former Soviet republics and from the Middle East. The terrorism is still there, international terrorism. But the service is getting less and less money, less and less public support. In a way, when the international situation is becoming more complicated, the British armed forces and the British intelligence community are financed more and more poorly. And it's not good, it's wrong. So that the British service has got tremendous traditions. The British service has got a fantastic staff, personnel of intelligent, trained and competent people. They need just a decent budget for their operations.
Thank you very much, Oleg.